So we've made our 4 pegs as separate parts. Now as we're going to assemble them together, there's a better way. Anytime you open a new part, it starts with 2 different tabs. One is the Part Studio, where you can design the part, that's what we've been using. The other tab is Assembly, which takes parts from your Part Studio and puts it into the assembly. You can, in an assembly, insert parts from other documents that you've created in the past. I can go look in my pegboard, find all my old files. However, this is not necessarily the way OnShape is designed to make your assemblies. There's a better way. This will work, and if you're using Inventor, that's the way that you're more familiar with. But let me show you a little more useful way to do it. Going back to our blank drawing page, we're actually going to recreate all 4 of our shapes all on the same page. Just like before, I jumped to Normal 2. I'm also going to hide my right and my front plane right now, just so that they're not sticking out there the whole time. And draw my shapes. Keep them pretty basic to start. I need a square, center point rectangle, a circle. Notice I'm lining it up to snap with this right here. That saves a step later on. You don't have to do it now, but it's convenient. The polygon, this one I don't want to line up. So I just make it off just a little bit into a triangle. And then I draw my plus shape. Okay, 4 basic shapes. Next we're going to add lots of constraints to make them how we want them to be. For this particular shape, if you click on a line, it selects it. If you click another line, it selects both of them. Notice the little 2 next to my mouse pointer. When I click a third line, it changes to a 3, saying I have 3 things selected. Go all the way around, selecting all the sides, and then choose the equal constraint. That will line all of those pieces up to be equal at the same time. It's a bit of a time saver that way. I also want to equal the 2 sides of the square. Next, we'll add some dimensions. The square was 1 inch. The circle is 1 inch. Top part of the triangle is 1 inch. And the plus from the left to the right is 1 inch. You'll notice some of these shapes, because we snapped them to the origin at the beginning, only move left and right. And some of them, because we didn't snap them, can move wherever. If you snap the triangle, notice it doesn't really line up very well with the other things. So we're going to line it a little bit different. I'm going to choose coincident and take the top of the triangle to line up with the top of the square. Same thing, so I'm going to take the top of my plus and line it up with the top of my square. With those 2 constraints, our triangle can now only move side to side, and our plus now only moves side to side. Next, I want to space these out. So I'm going to put a dimension between the square and the circle and make this 1 inch. Notice it's that edge of the square and that edge of the circle. Now when we're dimensioning between the circle and the triangle, if you try to dimension from the circle straight to the triangle, it measures a diagonal line, which when you make that 1 inch isn't really what we want. So what I've found is it's best to measure from the center to the center. Remember that the circle is 1 inch, so from the middle to the edge will be ½ inch. The triangle, since it's also 1 inch, from its middle to its edge will also be a ½ inch. So when we dimension from the center to the center, we need to have it 1 inch for the space between, plus ½ inch for the circle, plus ½ inch for the triangle, which, if you do the math, is 2 inches. That'll make an even gap here and here. Now I need to drag my plus over a little bit so we have space. I want to measure from the triangle over to the plus. Use that point. Lines up nicely. And I can make that 1 inch. Notice I use the point here and not the line. If you use the line, it's going to measure an angle, which is not what you want. Okay, all my shapes are now nicely spaced out. They move all together, only left and right. The next thing I want to do is draw a rectangle, center point, from the origin around all the shapes. Just like that. Now I'd like to keep everything spaced out nice and evenly. So the next thing then is to define how far it is from the edges to the shape. So I'm going to pick a dimension and say from here to this left edge is 1 inch. Now it's not centered. So if I do the same thing on this side and make it 1 inch, our shapes now must stay nicely aligned and centered. Now the only way that this can move is up and down. Those are the only lines that are still blue. So we'll add another dimension here. Let's say from our top to the top of our square. And we'll set this also to 1 inch. All of our lines are now black, and our sketch is complete. I'm going to turn off the top plane. So all we have now is our sketch. Now that we've drawn our shape, we need to extrude it. Choose the Extrude button and click on the main part of your board here. If you click inside a shape, it'll only extrude that shape. We want to click all the board around the outside of that shape. It will leave holes for all those shapes right now. Change your depth to 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 or 0.75, and finish. And now we have our board. I'm going to turn my origin off, just so I have just my board on here. Now that we have these shapes defined, we could go to the assembly and import the other pegs that we made. But because we have these shapes, we could make the pegs directly from this shape. Then if we ever change one, they'll perfectly match still. Just to be clear, this is replacing the work that you've done last week. We are not going to use those pegs that you made. Those were good practice, but there's a better way to do things. So come back to Sketch 1. When you click it, you can see this is the sketch where we defined all our shapes, has all our dimensions, and everything. Click the eye to show the sketch. This shares the sketch so we can use it for more things. We're going to extrude again and click in our square peg. At this point, it wants to close off the shape and add a new extrusion on there. Instead of add, we want new. New will make this as a separate part within our part. Make it 2 inches and hit OK. You'll notice that OnShape chose it to be a different color. It is separate. And down here we now have part 1, the main board, and part 2, the square peg. Let's do the same thing with the other 3 shapes. Extrude, click the shape, make it new, make it 2 inches. And once again, it got a new color. Extrude, click the shape, click on new, 2 inches. And a 4th time, extrude, shape, new, 2 inches. Now that we have all our shapes, we can turn this sketch back to not visible. And we have 4 pegs sticking out of our pegboard. Right now, these cannot move. They're solid pieces, they're attached. We'll teach them how to move later. In doing it this way, if we go back to Sketch 1 and change any of our dimensions, the peg will update perfectly to match it every time. We now have 5 parts. As you hover them with your mouse, it highlights which piece you're looking at. If you'd like, you could rename them so that you know what each part is. This is optional. This is convenient, so now you can easily see which one you want. You can say, oh, I want to hide the triangle peg, and know immediately what to hide. Next, we're going to add some sides to help support our pegboard. Clicking on this front face here to start our new sketch. And I like to always make it normal so that things look nice and straight as I'm drawing. To make our sides, we're going to draw a corner rectangle about like that. The important part of here is that this overlaps into the shape. We'll draw another one on this side. Those will be our side legs. We'll come back and make the sketch proper in just a moment, but I want to show you what we're going to do with them so you understand where they're going. So I'm going to finish the sketch and extrude these 2 sides. You'll notice right away that OnShape knows to cut this piece into it. This is called a Dado joint if you ever get into woodworking things. They're common in woodworking. They're extruding the wrong direction though. That's not really going to support our toy very well. This arrow flips them to go the other way. So now they're going to go on, and we want it to reach all the way to the back. Rather than drag it that far though, I'm going to change blind to say up to face. This takes the extrusion as far as whatever face we click next. That will make it always perfectly line up with our shape. Now, like we did with these, I want this to be a separate part, because when I'm building this pegboard, these are separate pieces of wood that we attach to the sides. So I'm going to, instead of add, choose new. This will make 2 new pieces because these are separate. You can see them down here, part 6 and part 7. Now these aren't very level or even or anything. It's because we didn't define our sketch. So we're going to come back to sketch 2, give it some better definition now. View normal 2 because things look better that way. We're going to use a handful of constraints. First, I want to make these sides out of the same wood as this, which means the thickness of this will be equal to the thickness of this. Similarly, this one's thickness should be the same as that thickness. Great. Those look better. Next, I'd like them to be the same size. So I'll choose this one and this one to be equal. So these line up. Next, I'll switch to coincident. And I want the tops to also line up. I would like the top of my pegs to line up with the top of my side legs. So I'm going to keep coincident turned on and choose the top and another top. Notice it does affect it to both sides. Now my shapes can still move up and down here on the bottom, and they can move side to side. So we needed to add a couple of dimensions. One dimension is from the edge of your board to the edge of your side leg. Remember, our board was 3/4 of an inch thick, or 0.75 inches. We'd like this dado joint to go halfway through that. So 0.75 divided by 2. You can do math in a dimension and it will solve it for you. And that lines it up exactly at the halfway point. I'm going to do the same dimension over here and line it up 0.75 divided by 2. I could also just write 0.375. That works. But if anyone ever goes to edit this, they'll see why I chose 0.375, because it is 3/4 divided by 2. That will help any future person editing this know why I chose what I chose. The only thing left is how far this is from top to bottom. This can currently move however you want. I want to make it symmetrical to the middle of this shape. So I'm going to draw a line right down the middle of our board here. When I go to do that, to get the middle, you'll notice there's a point that appears when you get close to it. Snap to that. As you come across, snap to it on the other side. Hit escape to turn your tool off. This line is fully defined because of the way it's already locked in place, but we don't want to actually build with this line. So right click and turn it into a construction line. Construction lines are there to help you with your drawing, but not to affect your actual part you make. They turn into this dash dot pattern. They're there to help, but not to change your part. Now that we have a center, we can choose a constraint we haven't used yet called symmetric. This will keep things balanced relative to some center line, hence why we just drew a center line. To use it, you click on the first thing, the center line, and the second thing. At this point, our side legs are even, they're the correct size, they're cut in just far enough. When we hit OK, it automatically resized everything to fit our new shapes just right. I'm going to come and rename these last two parts so that everything matches. We'll call that one the left leg and this one the right leg. Very creative names. Then I'm going to change some colors just for a little bit because I want my colors to look different. Okay, we now have all the parts for our pegboard set up, ready, labeled, colored, but they cannot move. This is where I'd like you to be for now. The next video will show how to make them move.